Welcome to Just Folks RI. This is a new podcast based out of the Beach Rose Studio in Charlestown, Rhode Island, hosted by yours truly, Paula DeLulo. So our first conversation that's going to kick this all off is with Vaya of Leyden's Sanctuary. You might have heard of her before. She is an incredible individual, smart and soul-driven, and she has so much talent and ability and story and adventure to share. And I've always wanted to have a deeper conversation with her. But if you're like me, it's hard to get into those big gatherings sometimes. Just maybe schedules don't line up. I've got a couple businesses to run. I've got a 3-year-old running around. But I still want to get to know I wanted to get to know her, and there are other people I want to get to know too, and I want to share those conversations with all of you. So I hope you enjoy. Vaya is an absolutely stunning individual, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. It really was a delight to have her on today. So I want to start with literally because I don't really know you. Like, I know of you. I've shared some space. We've had some moments. But like, who are you? And like, where's your heart these days?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Thank you for that. Who am I? I mean, I'm constantly asking myself that. Do we ever really know who we are?
Hmm.
We're we're always growing and changing and adapting and evolving. Wow. But I guess if I were to sum it up for a podcast for Just Folks RI, for the Rhode Island folks out there, I would say I am a land steward here in Rhode Island, third generation tree farmer who dabbled in Waldorf education teaching here in Rhode Island and ultimately decided that my highest calling and power and purpose is in holding healing spaces and gatherings on my property that I'm stewarding to connect people deeper to nature, deeper to themselves, and deeper to the community. Waldorf education really helped facilitate that for me in the beginning of like I'm raising children in such a beautiful, empowering way where we are in nature, where we are connected to each other, not to technology. And still, I felt, yes, the children are going to be fine because they have things like this, but what about the adults? Where are the adults having this untechnology, nature-based, ancient way of relating and getting to know themselves and each other and nature? And so that's who I am and hosting, and I just want people to be connected to themselves, to the earth, to each other, building community stamina and resistance and resilience together. Like there's nothing like getting together with local people and bringing all your skills and your experience and all your knowledge together and just sharing that. Or even just sharing some songs and music. And that was another thing that was so powerful for me as a Waldorf teacher is the shift in temperament for children. If you just all of a sudden start singing or bringing that you're trying to bring a whole group of children together, start singing. See what children come to you, you know? And then when you bring that to a campfire, you bring that to a gathering with adults where you're sitting around and making music, whether it be music we've known our whole lives or music we're just coming up with in the moment. These are such beautiful ways of bringing us all together and remembering, honestly, what matters the most right now and will only matter is the human connection that you have and also the connection you have to the earth. And so, yeah, that's who I am in a nutshell, like Waldorf teacher, land steward, trying to get people to be able to have the Waldorf education experience as an adult.
I
And that's where my heart lives. My heart lives in being able to be that playful child as an adult and creating that community that children have. As a teacher, I really noticed that families are seeking community, and so their community defaults to where their child is going to school. where their children are being placed more so becomes their community. Well, how about we have that community and also we have communities for adults to gather and be with and bring the children into that and have more healing spaces like that. So that's where my heart is. My heart is building community spaces for people to come with themselves, with their families, with their children, with their hearts and their souls, and just come connect to nature, to themselves, to other people. That's my heart's it's my biggest heart
So
calling right now.
this this makes me so curious about little you. So I have to dive into how you got here,
Mm.
and it can be physical, like, okay, where I'm curious about where you were born, where you're from, what your upbringing may have been like, and has this calling to play, calling to gather always been strong with you, And so I'm
Mm.
curious if there's like if there was it doesn't even have to be a moment, but just threads throughout your young life that kind of got you on this path.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because that really shapes who we are. And so I guess from the moment, like I was conceived, born, and raised on the land that I'm now hosting gatherings on. This is a family property, and so I was, so connected to the earth where I'm hosting gatherings now, but also where my soul came in to the world again was here on this land, and where I spent most of my childhood was running through the woods with my family and my friends and my cousins and jumping in our ponds and playing in our streams. And we had a Christmas tree farm that people would come to every Christmas. So we had, big Christmas times where, people are coming from all over to get our Christmas trees. But then also we would have, I remember growing up, we had like a hay ride and a pumpkin patch type thing with popcorn. And so I grew up like wild running around in nature and then also having people from all over the state coming to experience our land and experience and gather together with their families and with each other, just in a more general area rather than like the small knit groups that I've been holding recently. And so, yeah, I grew up on the land, like very tied to this particular property, and I kind of grew away from the nature a little bit. I feel like we all have that rebellious time.
Mhm.
And so I grew away from nature and was more dedicating myself to my studies. And like I really wanted to help people. So I was going to be a doctor. And so I was pre-med, really serious in my studies and training with, the best international practitioners and learning with them. And I shadowed Dr. John McGonigal out of East Providence. He also works teaching at Brown about integrative medicine. And so I got all these different modalities. And what Dr. John McGonigal told me at the end of my shadowing, at the end of my undergraduate degree, was go travel the world. That
Mhm.
was his advice to me was you should go travel the world. And so I applied to my top medical school while I was waiting in the airport with just my two backpacks and a $99 one-way ticket to Europe. And so I took off to Europe and I didn't come home for a few years after that. Traveled all around Europe, working on different farms, meeting so many amazing humans along the way. And I felt this call to go to India. So then I went to India and I did a yoga teacher training, and then I started teaching yoga in India. And just, I was living in a community with my yoga teacher training, which was about 20 people. But so that was an incredible experience of bonding, of like, we're going to India, some of us for the first time, which let me tell you, it's a little bit overwhelming. I didn't eat for the first few days because I was taking in so many other smells and sights and all the things. But to then be in a concentrated area with 20 people for, I think it was 28 days where you're really bonding and connecting to each other and you're in this group and you're sharing meals every day. And And that's what I loved about traveling through different farms also. It's the same thing. Like you're living with each other, you're working with each other, you're eating with each other every day. And I loved that. So after India, I wound up going to Australia and I was a live-in nanny where I was learning how to navigate, first time in the big city. I lived in Sydney, which was my first ever city, but it was so beautiful. I got to, help mothers and children to thrive in their everyday lives, and that was really powerful for me to see, the I wanted to be in family medicine as like doing more pediatrics, like children really have my heart and soul in caring for them. And so when I got to work with that in Australia, that was super powerful for me to see. Oh my gosh, there's so much. Like families need a village. Families deserve a village. And then I wound up finding a really incredible regenerative agriculture education center in Australia. And so I was living there with, 30 people who are like artists, musicians, farmers, healers, all these incredible skills where we live together, we work together, we share our meals every day, we host yoga for each other and sound healings and fires. And that's where I was when COVID happened. And when the whole world shut down, we were still doing everything the same. If anything, it brought us closer together because we were no longer leaving the property anymore. We were stuck on our property with 30 incredible humans, growing our own food, making meals, sharing meals together, sharing our skills and our knowledge, and just being in a concentrated togetherness. And when the whole world was being ripped apart and told to separate and isolate, we were just coming closer together as a group of 30 people. And that's really what dawned on me was, wow, I haven't been home in a few years. I have this beautiful piece of land waiting for me at home in Rhode Island. I need to start this there. I need to start gathering people and creating this safe haven. So not even like for the worst of things, because right, like we thought COVID happening, we thought the world was going to end. I thought I was just going to be stuck there for the rest of my life in Australia. I thought that was the, you know what? This is fine though, because I was growing my own food. I was working with incredible people, and every day I had purpose. I had people. And so coming home, I thought to myself, I have land. I want to start creating this for other people. I want to bring people to the land. I want them to connect to themselves, connect to each other, and to remember, right? That's all we need. Let's start growing food. Let's start, sharing our skills. And so, yeah, I guess that's the long range of how I got here.
There are so many threads I want to go down. But what just stuck out, I just wrote it down, was I had purpose, I had people. And that is like, I think I don't know you personally very well, but I feel like that is a huge heartbeat of, if you come to know Via, it's in this that's the pulse if you had to like put a tagline on it. So yeah, there's so much you're traveling. So I sometimes get caught up in like a logistics, like the how, the what. And what I gather, what I now know about you from what you just said, is that you are very resourceful, because so many spots along the way, it's like plot twist, now I'm a nanny. Plot twist, now it's an agricultural center. Plot twist, I'm in India. And absent like a hand of Midas being like, we give you $1 million Via to travel the world and go do these amazing things, which if that was your deal, amazing. I'm glad you get to share the love with everybody. But if that is not the case, you must be incredibly curious. Google must have been your friend at like, how did you find yourself navigating between the spaces that you landed? And when did you know it was time internally? What was the feelings you had when you knew it was time to
Mm.
go?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. And I wasn't aware until I was fully in it when I was traveling that I started living by the moon sign and the moon phases more than the sun when I was backpacking, right? Like I no longer had to keep track of Monday through Friday between school hours and
So I'm gonna
classes and
I'm
schedules.
I'm gonna just back you up. So you were backpacking across Europe. Okay. So I need context. So I want to know how you got between places, but you've got your backpack. The last I heard when you left after school, you've got the one-way $99 ticket. You're getting ready to go to Europe, one-way trip. Okay, so you're in Europe. What country and where do you go? What do you do?
So it wound up being easy for me because Rhode Island happened to be doing a deal $99 tickets to Ireland. So that was easy for me. I was like, I want to go to Europe, buy a $99 one way to Ireland with my backpacks.
Amazing. Amazing.
But yeah, I am very grateful for Google and a lot of the apps we have, right? Like I could find hostels, I could find farms to work on, I could talk to some of my friends who I already met in the United States who are now in Europe. So I did have some friends I had a friend who we have in Rhode Island, we do get a lot of people from Eastern Europe come
Mhm.
work for the summer. And so I had some really interesting people who were in Europe that could kind of guide me a little bit. But it was honestly just where I felt the call to go.
Mm, mm.
And to be honest with you, when I first arrived in Ireland and I didn't have a plan, the passport agent was not happy with me. He only gave me 3 days in Ireland. He was like, "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know where you're going. You need to leave in 3 days," and put that on my passport.
But what did you do?
So I was like, okay, I guess I'll just, I booked a hostel for a couple nights, so I'll just like wander around this hostel and find my way. And then I didn't want to get back in a plane, like I wanted to like fully be on the ground. So then I booked a ferry. There's a lot of ferries going to England, so I booked a ferry from Ireland to Wales. And
Whoa.
so I left the country out of a boat, which I found out is very common for the upper class. So I was, there with a bunch of rich old people on a big ferry. But so yeah, then I was in England for a little while, which I had a very interesting experience in England. I wasn't a big fan because London is a huge city. Like London was like mind-blowing, so I was ready to get out of there. And then I took the Channel, which is the underground train tunnel from England to Belgium. So that was my next plane. And then that's where I had my first farm. I had scheduled on an app. I think it was called World Packers was the app, and I found them. And the reason I chose them as a farm to work on was because they only required 1 week stay. Most people were like 1 month or 3 months. I knew that I couldn't commit to anything longer than a week. And I actually wound up leaving this farm within 1 week because it was terrible. I got there, and I guess the owner of the farm was undergoing cancer treatment, so he wasn't even there. So it was me and all these young volunteers just like playing around on the farm, making meals and, having dance parties and like having a good time. And then the guy came back, and then it became real serious. And we were shoveling like lots of compost and only getting bread and soup for our meals. And I was like, this is not I'm ready to go actually. So wound
Hmm.
up leaving and wound up going on because then you meet people, right? So then I met someone who knew someone on the border of France. So then we just took a train to France and then I was like, you know what? I want to go see my friend in Germany. So then I like hopped on a train and jumped to Germany and just like got caught and swept into that wave of like it was just about between every 3 days to every week I would be changing and going somewhere new.
So, and I know, I could, there's so many threads, but what does that do to, or how has that impacted? Because you did that for 2 years like that, that kind
So
of
that
that
was
pace.
no. Luckily, I slowed down when I got to India. So when I did that in Europe for a few months,
Hmm.
and then it started getting cold in Europe. Right? It got cold in Europe, and I was like, I think I'm ready. So I booked a flight to India. And so then I was in India, and then I was really grounded in India for that month of my teacher training. So I was grounded there. And then I had no plans when I was done with my teacher training. So it was kind of like I was back in that backpacker mentality. But everything, especially where I was in India, it was in Rishikesh, right on the Ganges River. Super magical, very powerful, very spiritual. And so I got swept right into that. And they were like, here's a house for you. Here's a yoga teaching job for you. Like, just come stay here right on the river, you know? And so I was, after backpacking for months, like, India really grounded me into this place, into teaching yoga and being right on the river,
Wow.
which was
And
a good preparation.
so, and how long did you do that? So you were, I mean, that sounds, and I believe that's called like the yoga capital of the world, like the like, right? It's like the,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. I've done an online program through Yogamoo that's based out of there as well. It's like a very large program, but it was beautiful, but not to get sidetracked to that. So I've always wanted to go. All the teachers are based there and they offer classes and like, hey, come to us, and kind of like what you're saying, we'll offer you the training and somewhere to be, and like there's a beautiful pathway. You can do integrative things with our hospitals if you complete these kinds of very
Mm.
extensive trainings. And so so yeah, it's a big deal to go to go over there, I would say, and not, and I wouldn't say just, as a certificate kind of program, but just as a soul quest. It's something for folks to look into. Um, so you had mentioned backpacking and lunar phases. So when did that become relevant for you?
That was, I mean, I didn't realize it until I was truly there in Europe and just like looking up at the moon and seeing the moon and being like, oh, that makes sense. I'm on my way to a new destination and this is the phase of the moon, or I can't see the moon right now. And honestly, I really felt like as soon as I left the United States and I left that, like, I had to be at work at a certain time, I had to remember what day it is and what time it is. As soon as I left that, and I was then in this, like, every day I had to find food and I had to find shelter, and it didn't matter what time or what day it was. I was fully in this, like, living in the lunar cycles, just like choosing and flowing wherever my body wanted to go, wherever the wind would take me, look up at the moon and see where it is and say, huh, that makes sense, right?
Mm.
That makes
There's
sense.
there's something divinely um feminine about how you describe that, because I feel that intuition is, and I don't know if it's, I'm no expert in these kinds of things, but intuition has always seemed like a divinely feminine trait. Not to say that men, I think we both know men and women have masculine and feminine traits, and I think that's just understood. But to trust what you're feeling and being connected to not time as this linear marker, like you're saying, like connected to a clock, but the phases of experience through time is different. And to feel grounded, there's got to be, I imagine, some sense of intuition. Um, the like plebeian in me wants to be like, were you scared traveling alone? But I don't even want to really ask that question because I think uh, it's almost like like patronizing to a human
Mm.
experience of, we're all wanderers in some degree. So I don't want to ask if you were fearful, but more your relationship of trust with yourself as you navigate this moving and exploration. And then the follow up, I guess, question to that would be, you know, what inspired you maybe to come back if you ever kind of really did? Like if you basically were to go back to the doctor that said, go travel the world, your like report of what that did for you, essentially.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
it's
sorry for
so no, it's so interesting you say that because there's a lot of people that I tell these, some of my experience to, and they're like, "Wow, you're so brave," or like, "Were you scared?" And there were even people. I was working at the farmers market the summer before I left, and you get to know your customers well, and you share all about your life, and they're like, "What are you doing? Where are you going? Tell me your story." And so I would tell my customers about me, and I had this one woman who was like adamant that I do not leave, I do not go, I was gonna get sick, I was gonna have a miserable time. She, really was convinced that I needed to stay where I was and not go anywhere and not do anything. And it was really interesting because even though this person is bringing their fears and their projections to me, it doesn't change my feelings. It doesn't change my trajectory because I'm getting such a strong pull to enter the world and just find my own way and find my own trust. And so many things were aligning perfectly for me that it was like my life was just going in a direction that I was like, there's nothing left for me to do but to trust, but to be fully open to the path in front of me. And and I do owe this to, the fact that I was, that innocent, just getting out of college age. I didn't have to get a full-time job. I didn't have to pay for a mortgage. I didn't have to feed my family. And I think that's where we kind of do sometimes constrain ourselves because we're like, well, how can you just pick up and leave? You're gonna have a miserable time. And it's like, well, I have nothing right now. I have nothing tying me down. And so I might as well answer the call that has been moving towards me, who's been calling me to go. And so I honestly didn't have any bad experiences. I had a couple like, experiences with like staying at someone's place that felt a little bit uncomfortable, but that happens here. That happens when you meet new friends. And so it's like it was the same thing, just moved over to another country and in a new place and just trusting in myself. And something that one of my managers told me, I was working for a local juice company called Fully Rooted, and one of the owners told me before I left for this trip, she said, I want you to know that there are always angels with you, especially when you travel. The angels are with you. And that was just reconfirming to me of like, yeah, you're right. Like I am so trusting and I am so open in this path because I believe in the angels. I believe in the support that is behind me, above me, below me, and knowing that I could call on them when I needed them.
Is
And
was that
because,
Amanda?
yeah, it was Amanda.
Nice. I only know her because of the cafe. Like we've get our kombucha through her and stuff. So, but beautiful. Anyone who's ever heard of being in their orbit has always been a good soul, and that's always like an amazing sign for a small or medium-sized business. So it's that's a beautiful thing.
Right.
Um,
I just got chills. Just got chills. Like, you know, you knew immediately who the woman I was talking about when I said that.
mhm.
Like, and that's just
Yeah.
the reminder, right? You have the people who are very scared and living in, I don't know exactly what the mindset and the lifestyle they're living in, but then you have people who are just like, your angels are with you. Just call on them and if you need them. And just that knowing of like there are angels supporting me. I never really had to call on my angels because I knew that they were there.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was
So
my fear stuff that didn't happen for me.
it didn't happen. I I find that so empowering. My husband's grandmother, she's there's like an internal story of her basically like going on like I don't know if it was a moped or motorcycle trip, but basically all the men were at war, and so there were a bunch of women left, and she and her gal pal like traveled across the country, and I think through time there's something, and I said it earlier, but like divinely feminine about not necessarily having a North Star. Like there's not this, I'm trying to chase this bone in this place, but following still a sense of purpose, even if it's not this like tangible, I'm trying to calculate, like if it's pre-med into this doctorate program into this, and I'm going to try to work under this person and get to there, and then I'll pay off my debt. And then maybe once I'm done, I'll have a child and I'll have no time for them. I mean, it can get really crazy really fast if we try to like play God, I think. So I'm curious how you returned back to the land. Was there like a period of time, like how did you return? When did you know it was time to come home and what did that look like?
That's a really beautiful question. I was actually just sharing this with someone recently because right now we're in this time, right? It's October, it's the spooky season, and we're moving into Halloween, which is the Celtic name is Samhain. And so I wound up moving home the Samhain of 2020, which 2020 was such a charged year, right? Such a charged year for so many people. And so we were all being bounced around, but I was like really concentrated and loving where I was at. I had to apply for a COVID visa in Australia to stay because my visa was expiring and there was a lot of things happening. And I was like, I think the best thing for me to do is stay here. But because the government was so crazy and all over the place, they never got back to me about my visa. And so I applied for a new visa in April. They did not get back to me until, and I applied for a 1 year visa. So I was like, I'm fine. I'll do another year in Australia. And like, I had a partner at the time. So I was like, I could, get a partnership visa if I want to, or I can go back to school if I want to. Like, there's ways that I can stay if I really am meant to stay in Australia. And so I was, enjoying my time and doing what I needed to do. And then this, I applied in April. I heard back, one of the last days in August that my visa was denied to stay in Australia and that I needed to leave by November. And so then I was panicked, not knowing what to do, trying to reach out to all my friends, trying to organize all this stuff. And then I was like, I'm going to surrender. I'm going to surrender and I'm going to go home. I have family, I have friends, I have land waiting for me to come back. They've been begging me to come back. They miss me, they want me. I've been super fully charged, traveling, meeting these incredible people, building my own internal flame, my own internal power. Now is the time. I'll go back home. And so I answered that call and I came back home around Halloween time, Samhain time, 5 years ago, 2020. And I think it was a beautiful time to come back, right? Like the spirits are more alive. That energy of your ancestors are still alive. Those angels, right? Those angels guiding you. They guided me right back home. And then it was really nice because I had been chasing summer, I left Europe winter to go to India. Then I moved to Australia, which is summer most of the time. And so I moved back just to start a winter. So I moved back home. I started connecting with my land. And because I had the experience on Australia, like learning regenerative agriculture, I also did a lot on learning about the Aboriginal people of the area I was living in. And I did a lot of reconciliation work with the women of the areas I was living in. And so I felt really strongly tied to the earth, to the land, and to the spirit of land. And so when I moved home from Australia, I came back to the land and immediately started speaking to the land, asking, saying, hello, thank you for welcoming me back. Can I start, planting here? Can I start bringing people here? And started really noticing the land in a different way. Like, yes, I grew up on the land as a child, but was I ever, maybe as a young child, I interacted with the earth and with the land as it was another being. But as I got older, I forgot. I forgot to interact with the land, to speak with the land, to ask her questions and ask her opinion and if I can do certain things. And so 2020, I just started asking. I spent time with her. I did not touch anything. I did not do anything. I was like, I'm just going to be here. I'm going to witness, observe, and talk to her. And so, yeah, I moved back with that notion and then waited about a year and then I started planting. And then a couple years later, we started hosting gatherings. And now here we are 5 years later.
That's I don't know if I should feel a sense of like ashamedness, but I my feeling of relationship with earth and land, or in general, the basis of most of my meditative practices is primarily gratitude, right? But until you just sort of said it in the way that you did, like coming back and being like, "How are you? Thanks for what?" Like I haven't thought to have the dialogue. Um, and it really actually, like as you were saying that, it's almost like when it feels so obvious, intuitively that this is some this is a, a living, I don't even want to say entity because it's not like there's a beginning and an end, right? It's connected to everything. But um, I think I've almost been caught up in a bit of like more of a worship mentality. Like like we occasionally have to, like we don't have to, but we have some chickens, and occasionally the ones that we raise, there's too many roosters. And it almost becomes like once or twice a year, like sacrifice time. We make soup. The blood comes into the earth, and we have a whole way of doing it. Actually, the only post I have on Just Folks RI, it's called "When to Kill the Rooster," and it basically is this conversation about. And it's kind of an abrasive way it's clickbait of some ways, but the reverence that can go into just the cycle of understanding where things are coming from and just the energetic transfers that happen. So much of my experience with the land that I had, which it's funny that you say October 2020, because I happened to move back to Rhode Island. I'm not born in Rhode Island, but I did live here for a while. And then I came back October 2020. So we both
Mm,
kind of came back at the same
that's
time. And
lovely.
yeah, a little sage orange. So I had been going to law school at the time in Michigan when kind of 2020 stuff erupted. And so much of the ambitious energy I had towards like, I'm going to become a lawyer, an intellectual property lawyer. I want to create systems around talent that allow talent to thrive. I'm a logistics girl. I want to be the wind beneath the wings of whether you're, especially musicians, that's kind of more my background, but I that was where, and especially how licensing and the complexity of all that, I'm like, I want to help be there for them. And yet some of it shifted with the COVID stuff. I was like, what do you want? And this calling for family and a return to home, and kind of just getting back to basics and figuring out what is this all about? Like, what is this life all about? So yeah, I agree. 2020 October was like an interesting time, I think, for a lot of folks. Um, so I love what you said, what you just said. I'm going to be thinking about that for days. I'm going to go as soon as I go home today. I think I'll ask the land, how are you? Thanks for being here. um,
Yeah.
So you learned so much about, like I've heard you mention like regenerative farming. I think through prior conversations we've had, I know you've done a program, I think through URI, some agricultural stuff. We haven't even touched on Costa Rica yet.
Yeah.
But I am curious about, like, I want you to nerd out with me for a minute about
Mhm.
some of the things you've learned about farming or the relationship with land, that because I feel like you have pretty grounded technical knowledge, but you're also a creature who speaks of their angels and spirit. And I kind of want to explore where those meet for you.
Mm. Wow, where the groundedness and the land meet the spirit and the earth. The spirit and the earth, right? Wow. And I think I feel very grateful to be here on Narragansett land, right? Like we're like Narragansett land, like Narragansett tribe, Rhode Island is founded upon religious freedom. So this was the place that people fled to have that connection to whatever they chose as their God. as their entity, as their, whatever their worship was, whether it was the Narragansetts worshiping the ocean and the seasons and the land. I feel very fortunate that we are on this land that has that spiritual imprint already in it. And so I grew up here on the western side of Rhode Island where we are close by to the Pequot land, where they have, Foxwoods Casino. But do people know that there's also a Pequot museum dedicated to the Pequot people? And so I grew up going not to the movie theaters and the malls. My dad would take us to the Pequot Museum to spend time on that land, but also to connect with the Native American culture. And so I think, I was from a young age always introduced to the Native American culture and the Native American way, where, they didn't go to a Catholic church. They went outside. They worshiped the sun. They made music, They lived by the moon signs, right? They lived more so by the moon signs than the sun signs. And so I grew up with the Catholic church, but also a piece of land in Native American wisdom, both within me, but also surrounding me. And so it was like I have both. And then in college, I found yoga and I found gardening. And it was like, okay, I'm kind of going to leave Catholicism. I was, taught to pray and worship and be in community. But now I'm finding yoga and gardening on top of, paying attention to the seasons of the sun and paying attention to the signs of the moon. And so I was able to really, learn the land teaches you, right? Like right now we've got this beautiful colors outside that have been changing. And they're telling us right now, they're like, you know, your season is changing both internally and externally. And I feel like just being able to grow up and witness the land and the seasons on the land allowed me to be able to feel the physical land where we're living in that groundedness on top of, okay, well, what is the thing behind the veil there? What is that higher power that's controlling this circuit that we're continuously going with the seasons of the sun and the phases of the moon? And yeah, I don't know if that answers any if, but I feel like, being taught to be Catholic, but being around so much Native
Mhm.
American wisdom and history for me really just allowed me to be like, okay, I see what it's like to praise and worship the invisible and also to worship my land, to worship what's around me, to worship the seasons changing and the trees right outside my door. I have a beautiful maple right here that just turns bright red at this time of the year and it just blows me away every year. Every single year I get blown away by the nature. It never fails to amaze me.
I it's so beautiful. I'm also I'm curious how this has also led to some of your technical training. That would be the other piece I think of the question is you have such a natural brightness and love in your heart for I think the moment. And you're following the winds. It's like you're navigate like a celestial navigator, but just kind of your own, world. And did you find that any of your technical studies, like, okay, you
Mm.
can love the land, but like I've got a bit, I wouldn't say it's a black thumb, but like I always found a bit more like I my connection with maybe animals has always been stronger. Like I've got like
Mm.
a lizard, I've got two fish, I have mice that feed a snake. Like there's and like we breed some mice stay and some mice go to feed the snake. There's a bit nature is complex. And I feel like I can like read my lizard. A lizard, it just doesn't look like it has facial expressions, but I'm just like, oh, honey, you're cold. Like oh, your lamp blew out. Okay, like or oh, you're looking a little depressed. Like let's look out the window together while I read to my son. Like so. Um, I I think the spirit of an animal is for me, it's a bit more obvious maybe than the you have to be a really good listener to to understand plants. Like you have to That's how I feel. I mean, maybe you have to also understand the language they're speaking more, like when they're hurting or when they need something or when they're thriving, like the signs for that. And I imagine there's things that you learn technically that help you know that language. So I don't know if you have a couple examples of like where the knowledge that you might have learned, whether it's from school or from reading, where you're like, yeah, this helps me feel more connected to something that maybe isn't just gratitude for land, not like it's just, but something
Yeah.
that feeds that, like strengthens the bond, kind of like
Mhm.
science and spirit, where those can kind of meet.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful. I love that you mentioned, that care that you see and you feel for your animals. And I grew up, in the country where, we have girls who are so in love with their horses and so in love with their animals. And I feel like there are kind of like these two spirits, right? Like you can either be really totally connected and in tune with the animal kingdom or really truly connected to the plant kingdom. And I feel like for me, especially growing up on a tree farm, I was just already kind of around the nature in that way. And then, I went to the University of Rhode Island, even though I was studying um, more so human biology, but I was taking some plant biology courses and I worked in the medicinal garden there at the pharmacy school. And, just and Rhode Island, University of Rhode Island is like a top agriculture school. And so to be around, just in general, people who are learning actively how to work with the earth, and it kind of is a trial and error. I mean, the first time I started really growing and gardening and doing things, I had no idea what I was doing. And it was kind of just like a trial and error and like a really true dedication to like, I want to start growing my own food. I want to start learning these things. And let me tell you, I've definitely failed. Right, I've definitely failed at it. And so one of the farmers that I worked with in Australia, he said to me, and it really struck me of, as a farmer, I only have one season at a time to learn. One season at a time, and that's it. It's not like every day you're learning. It's like, well, I plant this, and then this is how it goes, and then I learn for next year. And so it's really a long-term relationship, a long-term situation you have when you're learning how to work with the earth and you're learning how to tend to these plants and grow food. It's every single season is different, every single year is different, and you got to be really patient and really just surrender sometimes. But we are so lucky that we live in a time where we can go to URI and take a plant course. We can go on our computer and take a permaculture course. We can just watch videos on YouTube. We can read books about it on top of our actual physical experience with the plants.
Mm.
And I think it's a combination of all of it for me. Like I grew up on a tree farm, so I grew up having a little bit of knowledge about growing and starting, perennial plants. And also, I had the experience of like traveling to different farms, working with different farmers, and seeing all their cumulative experience,
Mm.
right? Of like they've been working on this farm for however many years, and this is what they're learning, and this is what they're experiencing. And
Mm.
so it's honestly been for me just accumulating all the experience of all the people that I've been witnessing and observing on top of my own experience into learning the plants and to have that already like deep knowing for me that I wanted to be working and I had more of a connection to the plant kingdom than I do so more so to the animal kingdom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. It makes me want. I have so many ideas for like my home and garden. Just being like in your digital proximity. I'm like, and we're the house that doesn't look pretty on the street because we let everything grow. So things don't look, we're
Mm.
not like the Joneses. So like across the street, literally, they have the beautiful tree that they let bloom and everything else is the beautiful, green American grass. And it's a gorgeous, most of the houses, like it feels sometimes I have that feeling like maybe my son should have the same kind of grass to play on. I mean, I don't even rake because I feel that I'm like, well, it's good for bugs and it like the soil, it does things like I've done landscaping in the past. And so I have like leaf blowers and things. And every time I like kind of want to get her going, I'm like, she's actually good. We have this beautiful moss that's growing around one of the trees that's always been there, and it's been growing and growing further, like more. It's been expanding. And there's the dandelions
Mhm.
that prior to us having it, the house, because for a while it was several years before the prior owners and the sale happened, they weren't there. But the fact that it hasn't been mowed. So now there's actual like dandelion leaves that are like perfect for salads, like growing around,
Mhm.
so it's a wild thing, but it would be so we've got the wild thing. I feel like okay, we're going wild and free, but wouldn't it be beautiful if we can take it an extra step? Are there You can
Mhm.
connect with stones if you make a rock wall and help tame some of those wildflowers. Some of the spiky things that want to take over everything. Is there a way that I can, not foolishly chase them back a bit to allow other things to happen? So you've at least
Mhm.
inspired one person today.
I love that you brought up the rewilding topic. This is a huge topic right now.
Mm,
Rewilding, and to be
I've
able to
never
just be
heard
like,
that term.
"Oh, you've never heard it. Well, you're
Mm-mm.
already doing it, girl. You already are doing it." Rewilding is essentially seeing the land already perfect and whole and saying, "How can I least manipulate you? How can I least, what's the least amount of change that I can do to the landscape that I live on that I'm not affected, right? The land's not affected and I'm not affected. It's like minimal landscaping, minimal change to the landscape, right? Because the land is whole and perfect as she is. And we are so fortunate and lucky that we're getting opportunities to live on her and with her again, you know? And so, like you said, not using the leaf blower, letting the leaves be, maybe there's some prickly things that might need to be pruned so it's safer for the children, but just keeping it wild because it's not only for you, it's for the bugs and the animals. And you've probably seen that. I don't know how it was when you first moved into your house, but the difference between when you first moved into probably a manicured lawn compared to now, you've just kind of let it go wild and free, and now you have all these insects, and now you have all these animals coming to have a safe haven in your yard.
And they all work together. And it's funny, like if you don't try to over manipulate, these interesting relationships happen. Like my husband and I have these very tentative but respectful relationships with two huge wolf spiders that live
Oh,
on either side of our front door. And like our And our house is like kind of like a split, almost ranch style. So we don't live on the bottom floor. That our house is really the second floor, and we have like our laundry and a gym kind of and it's a pretty unfinished basement. It's not like very finished. And so it invites more, we've got plenty of daddy long legs and things, but our bug count overall is pretty low as long as we are cool with the spiders. Like
mhm.
I don't actively go around dusting every cobweb in the corner of my basement, even though sometimes I feel like it's more when someone else comes over. I'm cool with it when it's me and but when someone else comes by and I'm like, hey, you want to, welcome to my abode. Don't mind the cobwebs because there's my friend Wolf Spider over there. Hanging out. We had a little stink bug that chilled on our cactuses by the window for probably almost like 4 months, before she went
Oh.
wherever she went. So I, the relationships, especially if you stay in one place, it's a beautiful thing what can happen when you allow roots to deepen. Um, and that's is something I guess I'd be curious because you've been semi-nomadic, but it feels
Mhm.
like you've made this sense of return. But you also have another life these days in Costa Rica. So I want
Mhm.
to hear about the relationship between what you're cultivating here in Rhode Island and also, when you go to chase the sun, so to speak,
Yeah.
what that means for you and what you're doing over there.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful. I love that you were mentioning the balanced ecosystem that you have at your house. You're like, it's not like we're super buggy, we're balanced. We have the spiders and they eat a good amount of everything else, and so it's balanced. And I feel like I'm really working on that balance right now. Living in Costa Rica, it's the same thing. People are like, "What are the bugs like there? Is it crazy?" I'm like, "No, it's actually really balanced because it is so wild. You're trying to maintain it the least amount of possible so that you're as a human, you're minimally affected because there's so much for the ecosystem to live off of. It doesn't want to live off of you.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's an interesting balance right now. So this is my second season going to be taking care of. We have land here in Rhode Island. We have land. My brother and I wanted to build, a retreat center sanctuary. He has his master's in social work. And so once he becomes a licensed independent practitioner, he'd love to open up his own little wellness center. He can be offering, art and music therapy and yoga. And, we can really have a collective of healing style therapy on our land here in Rhode Island. And, as I've been in Australia before and India, I really love the warm heat. I do not like winter. And so it's always been in the back of my mind, well, do I live between Australia and Rhode Island, right? Because that's where my community and my farm were in Australia. And so I did spend one winter in Australia, but it's just so far away. 24-hour flight, basically 24-hour time, like very crazy time difference. I think it's like 16-hour time difference. And so I've just been dedicating a lot of my, the last 5 years to like building the community here in Rhode Island, building offerings, hosting gatherings, building community. And I wound up coming across another sister here in Rhode Island who has a similar dream and a similar goal, but in Costa Rica. And so her and I wound up coming together. She invited me, "Hey, why don't you come to Costa Rica and come experience Costa Rica with me?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure." I came for a month and we wound up getting land. We were touring land, and there was a lot of questions of like, okay, like the land here is very different. It's more similar, I would say, to Hawaii landscape than to Australia's landscape, but it is growing similar plants. And so we wound up getting an investor to help us purchase land in Costa Rica. And so now we're in the process of I'm splitting, half my year in Costa Rica and Central America and half my year in Rhode Island. And so this is my second season going into it like that. I had my first season my first season last year where we had the land already, and I kind of knew I'd be going home at some point to see my land here in Rhode Island and to tend to things here. And now I'm trying to get into the groove of like, I really want to start focusing more on perennial plants, which is what a lot of the Native Americans lived off of as plants that would come back every year, or they would save the seeds of certain things. Like, I really want to I started here in Rhode Island a few years ago a Three Sisters garden, which is the corn, bean, and squash, which is what the natives lived off of. And so now this is my first year doing it on both continents. So we'll see how that goes. I hope it goes well. But essentially, we're starting, and it's interesting because in Costa Rica, the communities there gather a lot more often. I find here in the Northeast, it's a little bit more tricky. Like everyone's kind of in their own little bubble. We're all kind of busy doing our thing. It's hard to get us all to come together and gather. But in Costa Rica, it's just so much more tied to love and community and shared meals. And so we've got a large piece of land there. We've got nothing going on. We hope that we're going to get our permits, we're going to get our building, and so then we can start building a village to raise our children and be growing food and be, living that village lifestyle seasonally, right? Between Costa Rica, we'll have the village and we'll be growing our food, and then once that season dies out and the rain starts to come in Costa Rica, we come here to the Northeast and we're growing our food and we're living in villages here and really
Mm.
reestablishing that village living off the land lifestyle between both Costa Rica and Rhode Island. And so last year I started a garden in Costa Rica, but the ants ate it. So again, learning every season and trying to work with the ecosystem. And I'm very fortunate that this year in Costa Rica, we're long-term leasing another community nearby. And so we're going to be staying and working and living and growing food at this other community that's been established. And there are some local Tico people who are already have a greenhouse going and are already growing stuff. So I can work alongside the natives of Costa Rica with how to grow food, how to live and work on the land together. With already existing structures, which is a huge thing. Like here in Rhode Island, I barely have anything built on my land yet because it is so minimal. The land wants it to be slow. And so that's how it is on with our land in Costa Rica. We've got nothing on our land in Costa Rica. Like we're going very, very slow. We're asking her for permission and we're living elsewhere. We're living and work and like coming and just connecting to the land before we do anything.
So how do you know? And it's not like, I guess, an intellectual, like, I know, but how do you, um, how are you navigating? Because what you're talking about is this interesting intersection between community building, and there's also a huge aspect of entrepreneurialism that has like logistics of how is it going to work? How are people getting fed? How are people homeschooling their children? You have to interact with governments and banks and planes to go, like, so there's very much a real world. You're not talking about building like an isolated cult, it's like, or at least that's not what I'm gathering, with
Right.
Vaya as the head priestess, like you're not, it doesn't seem like you're selling that kind of opportunity. There's I feel this sense of invitation, for everyone to um, maybe connect with where they're at. But how are you planning for growth? If you're talking about community building, so much of that is organic, but is there going to be a point where some of that entrepreneurialism has to come in and you do have to seek people? Like we're calling carpenter families, folks, like we're rounding out. I don't know if that's like what I even mean, but I'm just thinking, I run a small kind of cafe studio in Charlestown, Rhode Island, and it's complex enough at it as is without growing things or any of that. So I just imagine there's so many variables. So how are you navigating the growth and moving forward with
Mm.
these dreams and also involving and trying to get more people to come on board?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's so different from what's happening, right? Mostly outside. And being a raw piece of land, what I've come to experience is it's going to be slower than everyone is comfortable with. It's going to be super, super slow, but the land will allow you to move forward with the things you want to do when she's ready. Like, I really just feel like I am a conduit for the piece of land. And so she can move through me and she tells me what she's ready for and what she's wanting. And so it's one of those things where it's like, it's deep connection to yourself through, I did a lot of meditation and cleansing and detoxing and yoga and in India, like I basically traveling around the world, I detoxed my conditioning that I grew up with here in the United States. And so then coming home, I was able to start fresh and connect deeply to the land and be able to listen to her. And so, yeah, it can be super frustrating sometimes to be like, you know what? I really need carpenters. I really need builders always. I'm always in need of carpenters. I'm always in need of builders and finding the right people that I can trust. And so it's trusting in divine timing, trusting that the right people come to me in time. And sometimes you're not going to get the right person. And it's, a lot of patience from me. But luckily, with my project in Rhode Island, like it is mainly my project. So I'm able to be like, when people are trying to rush me in the process and ask me the next steps and ask me what's happening and, really wanting to focus on the future and things happening. And I'm like, yeah, I appreciate your feedback. And also, like, I'm trusting in where the land is right now. She tells me what the next steps are, and I trust that she'll allow it to move forward as it's supposed to move forward, just organically,
Mhm.
And that's again back to the backpacking of just like being in the flow, allowing life to move through me and with me. And with Costa Rica, I do have, we have an investor, I do have business partners. And so it's like with that one, we are a little bit more mainstream with that, where, we have a pitch deck, we have, we have an email list and we're going to do Zoom calls and things like that to really rally the team and see who's around, just because it is a much more massive, it's about 10 times the size of my acreage here in Rhode Island,
Yeah.
this project in Costa Rica. So it's, 10 times the amount of organizing and business strategy. And I'm just such a little fairy that it's like my project here in Rhode Island is going to benefit from my experience building in Costa Rica, because I do have the people who are like business oriented, organizing, and like finding, because I think the biggest thing with land projects is finding the funding, right? Because if you are a landowner, you're spending so much of your time just managing and maintaining the land that it's like, okay, and also now I'm supposed to have this extra, ten to $100,000 to like build structures. And that's just not a reality in today's income, especially as coming as a former, elementary school teacher. I just at this moment in my life, I don't have this extra 10 to $100,000 to spend on structures. But I believe that through the community that I'm building, through the hands and the hearts that have been a part of this project from the beginning, I believe it will slowly start to build itself over time. And I'm learning from the Costa Rica project, about pitch decks and business calls, and so it's kind of organically working together, but man, it is quite the process. Yeah, it is. And it's a slow seasonal learning when you're growing food, of course, too, to remember that you're not going to be able to grow all your own food in the first year. Definitely not.
I personally benefit. I almost feel like there's like a mama spirit like patting me on the head right now almost because I do, like born and raised New York City, like kind of college preparatory environments. I was the weirdo for going to like Berkeley College of Music and stuff. Like I dropped out of Northeastern. I was like wanted to do pre-law there, and then I was like, where are the weirdos at? Like they're not these frat kids. And then like saw some kids playing guitar on the street, and before I knew it, I was like swept up and applied and got in, and it was like this whole whirlwind. But even there, studied music business, and my
Mm.
pitch in my interview was, "You have a bunch of fantastic musicians." I said this as a 17-year-old. You guys have a bunch of fantastic musicians. I'm not trying to be your best singer. I want to do you well by the music business program and the fact that you're trying to take yourself seriously as like a an academic institution, and I'll do you proud on that. And I think that's why I got in. I don't think it had anything to do with the jazz standard I sang. I'm sure my jazz standard was lovely, but I don't really think it had anything to do with it. And so I find I can get caught up, and I say this, I'm sharing this experience, hopefully not just selfishly, but I don't think I'm the only, you know, like I'm not the only one who's working towards deconditioning, towards this sort of top down control aspect. And it's funny because my kid started going to a Waldorf school in Rhode Island here. So and already even in kind of the application and acceptance and being a part of that community now, it does help with some of it does help with some of that. So if folks haven't looked into you know some of like Rudolf Steiner's philosophies with children, maybe go check that
Mm.
out. But it's a beautiful thing because you're talking essentially how to raise a child uh, in a way that's different than kind of the standard conditioning. And if you're an adult seeking to kind of learn again, it's kind of nice to look at the world through that lens. It's somewhat in a childlike manner. And I know, like even with my businesses here, I start with like the pitch deck, right? I'm like starting with this plan, and then things happen, right? That variables, like you try to play God, and it it doesn't really it never it comes back at some point to bring about the humility a bit of, you must go with the flow or everything in its season. And I think some of the difference in the approach too is like, yeah, when you have, I talk about this Venn diagram sometimes of, and I'm not the only one, I'm sure it's in 1,000 business books, but of like time, talent, and resources. And they're like the
Mm.
rings that go over. And you can almost like a Dungeon and Dragons character make any like whatever, bucket you get, like let's say you're all talent and you have almost like no time or resources. If you're all talent, you can do a lot with just if you are that talented or skilled or you've put that many hours. But let's say like I'm someone who I was intuitive but not super talented, but I was willing sometimes to put in the work, and I had some resources. So I had just enough in each bubble to like endurance my way through. Like singing riffs and runs didn't come easily. I had to work and break down every until they got faster and faster. Like I had to work for each one, and everybody in their own universe I think has their time, talent, resources kind of funnel. But when you have a lot of resource, weird things happen, I think, with the relationship with the land, which is my really long-winded way of kind of saying this, I think, which is let's say you just have all the money in the world and you can just hire a contractor and they'll just set up a greenhouse and you can hire gardeners from maybe another country, another world. Like you can get something built really quick. And if you just put out an ad saying, hey, we're hiring wellness practitioners, you could just pop something up in 6 months if you had the money to just dump into it. But I would love to hear your thoughts about what magic happens when that's not the case. When you have to play it slow, what are the benefits to not having just all of the resources?
Yeah, I love that you broke it down into a triangle, basically, of
Mm,
bubbles, because I feel like it's so true, right? Like you're always going to have maybe one more of these three. And I just have right now, I have all the time in the world. So I'm
mm,
up there with
mm.
all my time, and I'm like, it's okay, guys. I'm not worried about it. I've got all the time in the world to do this. Yeah, I have a little bit of resources and I have, a little bit of talent. Like, could you definitely use more on that side? And so it's like, okay, well, what's the balance here, right, of this triangle? That's so interesting to think about. Because, yeah, right now I'm just like, got a lot of time, got a lot of patience. That's all I got right now. I got enough resources to get by and I got enough talent to get by. And so it's like, but I got a lot of time. And it's calling in like, okay, I'd like, setting that boundary for myself, I guess.
That relationship, it's funny that you happen to have that time because it also just coincides so beautifully with your relationships to plants because they need time, like, right? That doesn't just go up overnight. And so if you were wired even but ever so slightly differently, you might love plants, but this, if you didn't have the time to follow the flow, like you can't have a business meeting with the land, right? Like, okay, for 30 minutes, we're going to connect and chat, and then I'll be back in 3 weeks and see where you're at for another 15-minute Zoom meeting, right?
Right, right. Right. It's so funny to think of it that way too, right? Because sometimes when you have all the resources, right, you don't have the time. You don't have the time to just take that step back. And so it's, different projects have those different bubbles. And it's really interesting to see, you can see these projects with all the resources or all the talent. And like, we are all getting where we want to go. It's just different timelines.
Mm, mm. So I have to ask, what do you see, you know, what's in the future? And I feel like I logistically we covered some of that ground. You've got the Costa Rica, Rhode Island, and you're building community. But if you had to, send a vibration out to the larger, almost like universe, whether it could almost be like not even a hope or a dream. Maybe it meets observation of where are we going?
Mhm.
What's in your world? Where is the pulse? Where are the pulse of humans as it relates to their land? Should we take particular heed or be cautious of anything? Should we be striving and working towards anything? Like if you had a call to man to the five people who maybe listen,
Mhm.
what
You never know.
you never know. But yeah, what would be, I guess, that outward vibration to folks that might be listening?
Hmm. That's a great question. And I'd say my biggest thing would be start really connecting to the land that you live on, the waterways that you live near, and bringing offerings, whether it be flowers or food or song or, a beautiful thing that means a lot to you. Connect deeper to the land that you live on, bring it things, sing to it, witness it, allow it to start talking to you. And same thing with the water. Go to your nearest waters, the waterway near you, and just listen to her, bring her things, and just start treating her like a goddess.
And
That's the biggest thing.
what are the like my instinct is always like gratitude. Like I know how to bring gratitude. I can bring my heart,
Mhm.
but are there tangible things that when we're um like you say flowers, I'm seeing I'm like I have so many things I want to do with Pete right now. I'm like, okay, we're gonna look at a map and identify all of our local rivers and we're gonna go sing songs to it right
Oh, and
now.
having a child is such a great way to do it because they're already so connected, right? Like he'll start, especially if he's going to the Waldorf school, he'll start building little gnome and fairy homes. He'll start building little gnome and fairy homes and bringing things to the gnome home you know, just bringing children is an offering also, I have to say. Bringing children into this world and bringing them to natural resource places is also an offering because that is a divine light being that you're bringing and bringing to the land where the land remembers this child and this child remembers this land and this water in such a deep way that just bringing your child to play in nature is an offering. But for those of us who don't have children, yeah, it's as simple as like seasonal gatherings, like right now we've got a lot of corn, a decorative corn and things like that. Bringing a piece of decorative corn and bringing it to a favorite spot and just bringing it there and placing it there with, like you said, that gratitude of like, I am so grateful for this piece of land and for this tree and for this water. And so here I am bringing to you something special or something that sparks my heart and sparks my eyes. I'm going to bring it and I'm going to give it to you because I want you to have this. And it can be as simple as, whatever seasonal harvest there is, whatever seasonal flowers there are, or if you have like special crystals that you want to give, or if you have something, if and this comes to a deeper part of like asking the land for things. If you have something that you're praying for, that you're in need of, or really, really want, bringing something close and dear to your heart and digging a hole, asking the earth for what it is that you want, and giving this thing that's dear and close to your heart and giving it to the earth with your prayer and seeing
Mm,
how she responds.
wow. That is, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Um,
This was such a powerful podcast. Thank you for offering this.
I, I, like I said, it came this is all from a somewhat selfish desire for me to have those deeper dives. And sometimes my nature can be, I love asking people questions and exploring in that way. And sometimes I almost feel like it's like socially strange. Like I'll go to like if I met you in a coffee shop, maybe it wouldn't be weird for you that I'm just asking you question after question, but it can feel a bit like it can like okay, it's an interrogation or something, and where it's like what's happening. Whereas I think in this format. you're expected to receive questions. And so it's maybe not so strange that I might ask you to talk deeper about some of what I think would be curious and interesting to others that have come across you. So thank you so much for joining me today. I have so many other things I want to ask you, but I think what we should do is have a follow up when you're in Costa Rica after you've sort of gotten settled and because I'd love to ask you about energetic signatures is sort of what my next follow up question that, if I didn't feel like we kind of came to a natural and where I would like veer off into that secondary, but just how we
Mhm.
enter spaces, how we leave spaces, the memory, like we fold paper and it has a memory. We have digital signatures, a trail of zeros and ones that follow us. And I don't think it's any different that our own comings and goings into land do similar things. So I'd love to hear about some of your experiences next time with
Mhm.
the comings and goings and sensing the energies that are there, especially because you will have just left a place and you'll be arriving in a new.
Yeah, and a whole new portal and vortex. Thank you so much for inviting me for this, Paula. And it's so beautiful that I met you on the land during a women's gathering. Also, I just have to end it on that note of like we met each other at a women's gathering on the land. And you brought up how it reminded you of your, Girl Scout camp, was it growing up?
Yeah, I went to a camp called Wakila in New Hampshire, and it was that was as a city girl, it was my connection to land for the longest time, just several months at a time with no like internet or electronics or anything. And it was all girls. So just I've never until kind of coming across the Rhode Island sort of more soul sister type community, something that I almost felt was lost to youth. And
Mm.
to have you come full circle and say we know how to do this for children. How do we do this for the broader community? I'm excited to hear you talk more about it next time.
Oh, thank you so much for having
Thank
me,
you,
Paula.
man.
Oh,
Namaste.
namaste, sweet love. Blessings to you.
You too. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye now.